Welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program, and thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Daniel Davis. We're approaching the holidays, and for many of you, that means holiday anxiety. Just think about it. According to national statistics, at least half of us have been married at least once and moving into a new relationship. Well, that also means blended families, step-families, stepchildren, grand-stepchildren, you name it and the like, which also means the dynamics of the family fluctuation is always going to change from time to time about how they want to approach the holidays, whether they want to be involved at all. Well, joining us today is an expert when it comes to what we would like to call family systems, and she's going to share with us today some of the things that we can do and shouldn't do when it comes to the holidays, especially with the blending of the families. And our guest today is Catherine Van Wetter, and she is the expert and CEO of Courage Consultants, and she's joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today. Catherine, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Daniel. It's nice to be on.
You bet. So are you looking forward to the holidays, or is this going to be one of those times that you find a lot of anxiety as well?
Well, over the years, I've learned to kind of put my anxiety into a little box and realize that it's also a time of wonderful resolution and healing. So I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, and that never-ending fruitcake that seems to go around the universe there.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people, they find themselves, when it comes to the holidays, it should be a time for a family to get together, to rejoice, to kind of just settle down and relax, and maybe even reflect on the new year as well as the past old year, but they find a lot of emotional anxiety surrounding that. Kind of share with us, what this is all about.
Well, it's interesting how we can kind of set ourselves aside from our family when we're going throughout our day-to-day. Somehow the holidays bring up not only the anxiety of being around friends and family, but also the unexpected things that are going to happen. And I don't know what happens to us when we step into the front door of our parents, of our grandparents, that we seem to catapult back in time, and all of a sudden we're either a toddler or a high school student dealing with some unresolved issues that we had not dealt with and that we're able to put on the back burner when we're not directly in front of the person that may have been bringing us some stress.
Mm-hmm. Now, obviously there are times that you'll kind of decide, well, I don't want Aunt Anna to be there, because of what she might have done last year. And besides, she's maybe part of a blended family that we'll be talking about a little bit later here in the program. But, it seems to me that people sometimes approach the holidays and they kind of pack their egos along as though, if I'm not part of this, then the holiday just doesn't fly, so you're just going to have to tolerate my behavior. What are some ways we can think about getting around that?
Well, I think it's quite humbling to step into our household and our family of origin, and as you noted earlier, oftentimes it's a little more complex than that because there's there's step-parents, there's blended families, perhaps people within our family have remarried, and to be aware of some safeguards that we can take care of. And I love a point that we say that we leave the ego at the door as we step inside with an open heart and loving compassion, and with the wish that perhaps this year we will have stepped forward a little bit more in our healing to be able to look at who's in front of us with more compassion.
I mean, yeah, you can just imagine, here's the family settling down to dinner. We have the children and the grandchildren, and it's about time to carve the holiday roast or the turkey, and it's a step-grandfather who's doing that. And that might just kind of change things quite a bit.
Right, and this particular approach to family systems work that I deals with different systems and who moves into our family system and who we regard as either family of origin or immediate family, and the position that they take and the attitude that they often take when they step into a position that we may or an individual may feel displaced in. And being aware of the subtle and invisible dynamics that occur within a family help us to perhaps prepare ourselves a little bit better to be able to see who's sitting at the head of the table, especially if it's not, for instance, our father, our biological father or our biological mother. So the ego, as you mentioned, does need, it's with curiosity that we step into it, and hopefully things will be able to ease their way into a good conversation that's not too superficial.
We're coming at you live. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and our guest today, Catherine Van Wetter, and we're talking about how to untangle those knots as we approach the holiday season with family. And if you have any questions or comments, or maybe want to share a story with us, please log on and let us have it. We're here and we're live, so be sure to participate if you have any questions or comments. Now, the first thing, as I was talking about, with the national statistics, that half of us become divorced and then we find ourselves in new relationships. What are some ways that we can untangle or untie the knots when it comes to step-parents?
Oh, step-parents. I think, for one, coming from a place of, again, I'm using that word a lot, compassion, I think one of the most difficult jobs to do is to step into a family that's already existing. And some step-parents have either had no previous experience stepping into a blended family or have had children. And sometimes they come in with the attitude that they should be the ones that a child may, be it an adult child or a young child, looks up to as an authority figure. And for those who are out there who do have step families, that can really trigger some hidden emotions with the how dare you factor, how dare you step up and take the place of my mother. So with the step-parent coming in, I believe that it's important that we function, that we come from the place of realizing what our own triggers and our own issues are in regards to the place that we're going to take within the family, and honoring either the mother or the father who is perhaps no longer physically present within the family dynamic that you're stepping into.
I know it's got to be hard, too, for a step-parent, because as they go into a new relationship, just like any of us, we want to be accepted, loved, and liked, for the most part. And, you can find yourself at times just pulling your hair out trying to please, the people, whether it's the son, the daughter, whatever the case may be. And after a while, you can find that if there's no resolve, it's sort of like, well, why am I even wasting the time? It's like I'm being punished for something that I'm not even aware of.
And sometimes we can go into our little kid act if we feel that we're being punished, and then act just like they do. And so to take the high road can be difficult. When we speak of systemic constellation work within the family of origin, children have what's referred to as an invisible allegiance or an invisible loyalty to their biological mother and father. Whether they're aware of it or not, they've got this invisible loyalty. So when someone steps in from the outside, taking the place of being a parent, be it a father or a mother, it can be particularly challenging to a child, especially if that person steps up and says, all right, I'm going to rule the roost now. You're going to listen to me, and I'm going to demand that you be like this. And what's going to happen is retaliation on the part of the child, where the children are they're wonderful observers and they're lousy interpreters and will manipulate and sometimes make someone's life very miserable and reject, and then the person coming in as a step-parent will feel frustrated and may lean towards her husband or her partner or his wife and lean on them and expect to be supported by the husband when in actuality his main responsibility is to the children. And so we come into the whole hierarchy of people being in their right place, and it takes a mature person to step forward and say, I honor you for the family that you've already created. How can I step in with ease and with grace in order to be accepted and received well into the family?
Yeah, it certainly is a challenge, that's for sure, but a lot of times people also want to stick to their guns and be right, whether they're right or wrong or not. Now, here's a really interesting one that, a lot of people may not think about, too, when it comes to families and the holidays, is when we talk about adoptive parents. I mean, here's basically a child that I would think that being under an adoptive situation must have a feeling of being abandoned, and now being accepted by someone. I mean, that's kind of a really challenging one there, isn't it?
It is, and when we, again referring to systemic constellation work, when we look within a family system, there's what we refer to as a collective conscience. And when an injustice has been done within the family system, such as if a child is adopted either in or out of the family and is not honored or is not looked at as being part of the family or being excluded from the family, then the child will go throughout their life wondering where they belong. So one of the dilemmas that adopted parents have is that a child, when they get to a certain age, may want to meet their biological parents, which can be a threat to the adopted parents. And a beautiful ritual that we do is, again, going back to the invisible loyalty that children have, regardless of their age, to their parents, that when we can set it up so that the adopted parent and the biological parent, either in your heart or in your mind's eye, if the child can realize that the biological parent, for whatever reason, gave the child up, and we don't know what the circumstances are, and for many children it's not our place to know what it is, that the biological parents in gratitude thank the adopted parents and allow the child and give the child the space and the permission almost to be able to love both. And because the child may feel, well, why did you leave me? It's not fair. And I'm also split with loving my adopted parents. So if there can be that agreement on both ends that the adopted family is graciously taking in this child to love as their own, also realizing that the child will have the connection, the energetic connection, if you will, or the genetic connection to their biological parent, that it's all right and it's not a threat to the adopted family.
And the phone lines are open, so if you do have a story to share with us or something we might be able to help you with when it comes to trying to ease into the holidays, whether you're a step-parent, adoptive parent, or you're part of a blended family, we want to hear about it and see what we can help you do. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis, and I'm talking with Catherine Benwetter of Courage Consultants. Now, we talked about the adoptive parents, and, that would be a strain, especially if around the holidays all of a sudden the child's old enough and decides, well, I'd like to get to know my biological parents, and they feel that threat. That would certainly put a damper on things, but let's kind of take a look from the child's point of view, the adoptive child, when that comes in.
Well, the adopted child, again, sometimes out of the health and well-being and the mental health and well-being of a child, sometimes parents will opt not to say you're adopted or, you're part of our family. And as many of us may know, very subtly we know when something's not quite right. So when the child with curiosity does want to get to know who the biological parents are, it takes a lot of maturity and resolve around the adopted parent not to feel threatened. And I believe that a child, once they know where they've come from, because there are not only are there historical perhaps details that they can get of what their history is and what their genealogical background is and their lineage, et cetera. There's also medical things that can come up. Perhaps there's a predisposition towards a disease or whatever. So there's many factors on reasons why a child would want to seek out their biological, and to have that sense of knowing where they belong and where they came from. And again, coming from the perspective, it takes someone of courage to grant their child the permission, for lack of another word, to say, I fully support you in wanting to find your biological parents, knowing that the child's heart belongs not only to the adopted family and also to the biological. And what can happen if there's a wedge that's put there, or if the adopted parent feels threatened on some level, then it can thwart the relationship that they've established with the adopted child.
I know it's certainly possible. As you said before, all we have to do is just kind of find a way to open our hearts, I suppose, and, where you can actually have a relationship with the natural parent as well as the adoptive parent, and then those parents can together have a relationship should they choose to, and as you suggested, it takes quite a bit of maturity.
It's interesting. NPR a couple months ago had a segment about a Caucasian woman who adopted 2 African-American children. And when one of the children, a male, got to 18 or 17, they wanted to seek out their biological parent. And so the mother who had adopted them was secure enough in her relationship with her son and wanted to, again, create the wonderful bond that she had established with him and gave him full permission to do that. And what she was struck by as she met the biological mother and saw the connection that the boy, the young man, had with his biological mother, she was stunned and felt it and was so heartened by that connection. And she made a comment, which is ironic because we are our parents, whether or not we like it or not. We're our fathers, our mothers, our
who
grandparents.
Who we are is not entirely our fault.
No, it's not, and it's taking the greatest gift they gave us, which is life, and leaving if we have entanglements or if we have burdens to leave what isn't ours to carry. And she said, as she saw her son and mother walk away, she noticed that they walked the same way. They had the same step, their legs moved the same way, and she realized the importance of him stepping into the field, not only being African American, and being raised in a Caucasian family, also honoring the huge genetic pool that he, for whatever reason, had been pulled away from. And so, if anything, if it's going to be, there's so many. The title of this is Fractured Families. There are so many folks in the United States, so many families that are fractured and split apart, and coming from the place of insecurity. Will you love me if you go to your biological parent? Will you love me less? Will you leave me? Ultimately, is the bottom line for many folks. If we can see how grounded and how centered and how a child is able to feel the significance of where they've come from, then it allows them the open space in order to turn and love whoever comes into their life.
Well, it would seem, too, based on the story that you just shared there about the young African-American boy and the Caucasian mother, is that she gets to see the whole of him for probably the first time, so that would almost seem to be in some ways a bonus for allowing or encouraging your adopted children to revisit who their real mother and father are, so you can get that extra piece of the whole and understand some things.
Because in our society in the West here in America, there are many folks who are raised with their biological family, not even mentioning adopted ones or blended or step family, who don't know where they came from. And so there's often the quandary. It reminds me of the Dr. Seuss, Are You My Mother? That book. I mean, who are our ancestors? Who are our parents? And where do I belong? Because we all, to have that feeling that we're significant, to know that we have our place, to know that what we do is important, and that we have our tribe, so to speak, is imperative for good mental health. And this approach goes beyond our ego. It goes beyond what we know in our head. It's more to the senses, getting all our senses engaged, to the realization that when I can be congruent in my actions, when I can be congruent in my belief system, that then I can step forward and be of service to whatever capacity I'm drawn to.
I know it's also interesting, too, when you talk about America and families, is it seems that a lot of times here in America that couples have children like they're some sort of a commodity. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not, but it's sort of like, I've got the career now, our next step is we have to have children, as though there's a societal template that's telling them this is part of the process, but yet they won't abandon their careers and their personal drives, and so the child is basically left behind in a sense anyway, except for the holidays when they finally decide, okay, we're going to get together, we're going to try to be a family, but for the rest of the year, forget it. And you can imagine that the holidays would be a burden, especially for a child in this particular sense, because it's the only time that mom and dad are actually paying any attention to them.
And it's difficult being in the society we're in. There's so much shift and changing, not only within the family, also within what you touched on with working, double incomes, double earnings, and having the latchkey kid, the one who comes home with no one at home except for the television, or the children that are in preschool or in daycare while the parents are working. And so there's a lot of the system that is definitely up for reevaluation and resetting our priorities. And children, I'm pleased that it's coming to the point where if people don't want to have children anymore, it's not such a social taboo anymore. Taboo that it's okay if two people decide that they're not going to have children. It's how much that's changed over the last 10, 15, 20 years, where it was almost expected, when are you going to have kids? And to have the courage to say, what, we've decided not to, and that's okay. And I believe that part of, again, the shift and change that's happening is if you want to see what our societies looks like or how our society is doing, take a look at our teens. And because of the state of the world and because of so much anxiety and fear and so much flux happening, we do look at our teens, and many of them are struggling. Could it be a result that the parents work full-time? Who knows? There's lots of variables, right. Certainly not to point a finger. And to also, again, it's looking internally and taking a deep look at yourself, or at an individual, partner to partner, person to person. What am I doing to influence my family? How can I be more present other than on the specific holidays where there may be resentment and there may be some passive-aggressive behavior that shows up? And so it's a tricky thing to look at that, and it also takes incredible courage and honesty to take a personal account of how we're living life as a parent.
It's also interesting, too, that when the holiday rolls around, we can call it Christmas Day, if we will, and the family comes together, there always seems to be at least that one family member in the group that basically wants to steal the show one way or the other. And what's that all about?
Well, we've often referred to as family systems that they're oftentimes within a family system, and I think most of us can think of this, the one that's the black sheep, the one that's been excluded, the one that doesn't get enough attention. And because of being a collective, if that person shows up in that capacity, then sometimes we identify them as being the problem. Every family has the problem client or the problem child, where all the emphasis goes towards this one that needs so much attention. And my belief is that if we have a system, if we have a family system that is working on the capacity where people are in their position, people know what their roles are, what the unspoken rules of a family, was similar to what we had in a nuclear family. As much as it may have had its difficulties, there was still a certain amount of alliance and allegiance and stability within the family. If one speaks up and needs so much attention, then the curiosity from the family members, from the father and the mother, is to see what is missing in the child and perhaps what we're not hearing with the behavior where they're the ones who need to show up, and what are they trying to tell us, and what do they need from us currently within the family.
It's such a crazy world. We all want to be loved. We all want to be accepted, and there it all is. And sometimes we have to decide, how much of it we should have and how much we should just kind of let go and just be happy with. And so now, how do you help work with people? It's really interesting because you keep bringing up family systems, and these could be systems that are even beyond ourselves. And you also suggest that it goes back into honoring our ancestors as well. So how do you help people work with these things so they can have a clearer understanding about how they can open their heart and just make that shift? Because I know that there was a particular program I was paying attention to not too long ago that talked about the holidays and tradition, and that one of the ways to keep it from going sour is just change one little thing. You keep it traditional, but add something new or take something away to make it just a bit different so that you can adapt the holiday to be kind of different and in flux. And in some ways, it sounds like that's what we're trying to do here.
Well, one thing that I want to go back to when we're first born, and I think about how clever we are. When we're born into a family, when people decide to have children, we're born into a certain paradigm or a certain construct within a family system. And from that point, depending on the health and the well-being of the family, children oftentimes are born and grow into a sense of self, and they're balanced and they're able to cope well with things, and there's a term called differentiation where they know that they're separate from a parent. They know where their place is. They know that the only responsibility they have is to take the love of a parent, and the parent knows the only responsibility is to give love to the child. And ideally, how many families do we know that are like that? Mm-hmm. We grow up with the cleverness of what we term as the inner critic, where some of our behavior we may discard, so we push it deep down inside of us. It's also called a shadow. There are parts of ourselves that sometimes we don't want other people to see. As we grow up and get older and leave home, these parts are wrapped up, what I like to think of as in shame or in guilt. And so sometimes individuals' cores of who they are, their core beliefs, their core values, whatever, are, of course, directly influenced by their upbringing. This particular approach to resolution, I'll say it's resolution. With resolution can come healing on an emotional, physical, and spiritual part. It's different than a lot of talk therapy. The approach is different than, for instance, cognitive therapy, talk therapy, in that we drop more to our senses and we bring the person home rather than having the person, the individual, the client, feel separate from their family like so many members do. They move thousands of miles away from their families, or they excommunicate themselves or emancipate or divorce themselves. Whereas this approach, and it takes courage to do this because the truth rises oftentimes, this approach is encouraging and creating a safe enough environment for the individual to actually take again the love that they received and the life they received from their parent, and then to discard burdens or parts of themselves that are not theirs to carry, and working from a deep inner level and taking responsibility. Sometimes with some folks I've worked with, I've noticed that sometimes it's very easy to blame someone outside ourselves for how our life turned out. And there's a lot of victims running around, and while I know that there are victims, I'm not saying that there aren't victims. When we come to the realization that we've come to a certain age, that all of a sudden we're an adult, and it's, am I going to continue blaming someone else outside of me, my father, my mother, my grandparent, whatever, for doing an ill to me? Or am I going to stand up and see some truth surface in front of me, and then at that point be at a pivotal place to either say, I'm going to move forward, I give back to you what isn't mine to carry. Perhaps it's an addiction, perhaps it's an illness, whatever, that we give it back to the person that it belongs to, and are able to step in with, again, taking the love and consenting to what is. We may not like our name, we may not like the family we were raised in, we may not even like the color of our skin, yet the reality is, it is what it is. And when we can come to that place of consenting rather than accepting, because when we accept something, it comes more from the ego and you can renege at any time. When we consent to that, then that's when we can start coming from the place of having an open heart and having grace and compassion towards not only ourselves, also from where we came from, and those in the world as well.
You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and our guest today, Catherine Van Wetter. Now, it's interesting that you talked about what you just did about the ego, because the first thing that came to mind as you were talking about this was forgiveness, and people say, well, I forgive you, but I'm not going to forget about it. It's almost as though they're using forgiveness to punish the person.
Right, and my belief is that there's different levels of forgiveness. Sometimes when we forgive somebody, we can be condescending. Oh, I forgive you, and I'm not forget you. Every morning I'll wake up with that little forgiveness prayer. So this approach to the resolution that we do comes from a place of compassion. And when I've worked with someone long enough and when I've created enough rapport with them and enough safety, I can approach them and say, to have them think about it for a moment, because first your head needs to be satiated. Your mind needs to feel like it's safe enough to drop to what we call the heart, to drop deep inside ourselves and to really be able to feel and hear and know what we're seeing in front of us. And first the head needs to be put in its place. Once they've come to that point, then I say, what if a victim were to have compassion, not necessarily forgiveness, compassion for the perpetrator? When a victim is able to have compassion for someone who's done them an ill, whatever, abuse, trauma, with the realization that the perpetrator themselves has been a victim, it allows the victim to be able to do healing on such a deep, profound, and subtle level. And there's the adage or the metaphor that if you step away from the dance floor, if two people are dancing and one steps away, it's difficult to continue the dance. When a victim is able to look at the perpetrator with compassion and step off the proverbial dance floor, then it allows for the healing to happen. In fact, this particular approach, based on Bert Hellinger's work, originated in Germany during the time of Nazi Germany, and his hope was that by doing this type of resolution that there would be some peace and there would be able to be some compassion between the Nazis and the Jews to cause the healing on a very, very deep level. And we think about the Mennonites, remember when the shooting happened with that community, that they actually went to the funeral of the person that had taken the lives of their loved ones and their beloved children. And they had enough composure and compassion truly from their hearts that they were able to attend the perpetrator's funeral and be able to leave and have their resolution happening on a very profound, deep level.
Well, because I'm relatively new with this talk shoe system, I'm going to take a shot here. We have Ken. Is Ken on the line? Okay, probably not, just probably listening in the meantime. Well, Ken, if you have a question or a comment for Catherine, please join us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Now, we were just talking about forgiveness and how people can sometimes use that as a tool to basically torture, for lack of a better word, somebody, but it's constantly when you take a look at the fact that we really are all connected, we're actually all relatives of each other, so there shouldn't be, in an ideal world, anybody blaming anybody else for where they are. I mean, where you are is where you are, and that's pretty much the way it is. But it's funny how we can scapegoat by blaming other people, whether it's your alcoholic parents or your great parents for not being around because they were over-providers, whatever the case is. When it comes to the holidays, it seems to be one of those times that, darn it, I'm going to demand that I'll not only be recognized, accepted, and perhaps loved, but also I'm going to punish you at the same time for having me tolerate all this behavior throughout the year and whatever the case is. And so when you talk about systemic constellation here, you're going way into the deeper level of things that is what you might even call the unknown things that you, as the person who feels it's suffering so much, aren't aware of. And if you can bring those up and clear those out, you might be in for a really wild ride where you start embracing the holidays and maybe wanting to be around a lot more than you used to.
And it's powerful because, and I want to revert back a little bit to what you mentioned about forgiveness. Forgiveness. One thing when I'm speaking to someone and they use a word such as forgiveness, respect, soul, whatever, I always make sure that my understanding is the same as theirs as far as what that means. So forgiveness means different things to different people. And the forgiveness comes straight from the heart, and there truly is a forgiveness not only for the person in front of them, for the individual that is putting it out there as well. So that's one thing. Isn't it amazing when we have a room full of people, all of a sudden we toot our horn and we say, how dare you do what you did to me when I was growing up? And the humiliation that happens.
Like I said, the holidays become like, 8 rounds of boxing instead of a time to celebrate and just enjoy being together.
And it's a battlefield. And what I know to be true, I'm trained as a neuro-linguistic programmer, NLP person. And one of their examples they gave is you go to a movie with these really high expectations. We go to our family functions with these really high expectations. 90% of who we are is our past, and be it unresolved or resolved. And so we step into a familiar setting, which is our family, which has its own energetic pull and its own what we refer to as the field. There's a reality that can happen time after time. It's like stepping into the vortex. That we step into a very familiar field. Oftentimes, unless we've become conscious, because again, 80% of how we function is unconsciously, and even though we can say we're conscious, I'm consciously gonna put my best foot forward when I go to my family, and I'm not going to bring up my resentment. Well, you sit there and you're eating the turkey and you're doing whatever, and all of a sudden, what should come up and out of your emotional ethers is something from the past, and so that kind of comes out in either a sarcastic way, a humorous way, by the way, and by the time it's out of the mouth, then we get reactions from people who are used to responding in a certain way. We get really good when we do the same thing over and over and over again to respond exactly the same way. So if we come in with the notion, here we go again, I'm going to be stepping into the same kind of atmosphere I did before. When we step into a function with that in mind, then that term of self-fulfilling prophecy will happen. It happens.
It's just funny, when you talk about, the basically WWF of the holidays, it sounds like, there are some times where things like that actually happen. And it looks to me like Ken's got a question here. It says, does this work impact just the present, or does it somehow have an effect on the past, generational challenges? And it looks like there's a little more to that. And maybe clear the path for the future. So I guess basically his question is, does this work actually help affect the future by looking back to the challenges of the past and maybe even the present? Does it actually clear that up?
Well, I believe it does. And again, you express the notion that we're all one. All my relations, everyone, we're all connected, be it the ones who have crossed over, the ones who have died, or the ones that are currently here, and the ones that are going to come after us. So if we look at it in that context, there's a beautiful quote, there's a beautiful term that we use in the systemic constellation work, that the peace of the dead is dependent on the living. The wellness of the living is dependent on the dead. Much of what people carry around with themselves as what we refer to as psychological burdens, emotional burdens, physical burdens, spiritual burdens, stem directly from what we've gained from either our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, and from the lineage or the culture that we were raised in. And so if we look at it as an emotional fracture or a physical fracture that's made its way down through the generations, if there's no resolution, if there's no peace, if there's no healing around that, what it'll do, just like in a building, it'll continue to fracture on down the structures so that someone will take it on for themselves and take it on in a way that we refer to as atonement. They will make an atonement. They will someone within the family will attempt to correct an injustice that's been done within the family. And an injustice may show up as someone being rejected from the family, being a black sheep. An injustice may be a child that has been aborted or miscarried and is not remembered or recognized or honored as part of the family. It may come as a child that's adopted out and is not remembered. It may be that a family member was killed in war and was not recognized for their sacrifice. So there's many reasons how an injustice. So by an individual doing their work now, as I do my work, as I become clear, as I courageously go deep into these parts of me that have been so cleverly covered up, as I pull these things up and give the burden after taking responsibility to the person who gave it to me, I release them and I give it back to them so that I can begin living a life that's unencumbered and that's free to be able to teach my children and everyone who I come in contact with again, having the loving heart and coming from a place of present moment rather than, again, 90% of who I am carrying from the past.
Well, a lot of people tend to do that, too, is they'll live their life presumably thinking they're in the present, but then they see it through that filter of the past, as you said. About 90% of how people will see and experience things comes from that past place. And when you don't have your finger on it, you can find that, the present as well as your future can kind of get a little tumbled and scrambled. As you were talking about that wonderful quote, I'm remembering the movie Amistad, where they called forward the ancestors, and it was simply said they must come because we are the whole reason they ever existed. And I thought about how powerful that truly really is. And so when you look at traditional psychiatry, psychology, and talk therapy, it's like you're spending years telling your story rather than getting to a root cause or myriad of causes within the web and trying to find how we can tighten those certain things. And as you keep saying over and over, where our place is in this whole system, and how you can actually clear a lot of that out at such a deeper level that, as it's been said over and over, is an unseen thing, and it's quite interesting. So how does that work? How do you go about helping people do this? Because you've suggested that you don't have to sit in an office and tell a story, that you could do it over the phone. It's just mainly, kind of getting into the field, if you will. So share how this works, what you do.
Well, for one thing, isn't it amazing how so many of us identify who we are by our story? Who are you? Well, I'm abused. Who are you? Well, I'm a mother. Who instead of I am.
I'm a cook. I'm a construction worker. I'm a convicted felon.
So then that becomes the reality. So then you go and speak to, and I think talk therapy definitely has its place. I'm certainly not dissing it or saying that it doesn't.
No, it actually helps bring it out at least the way you see it too. So that's always important.
And sometimes people come and they are very attached and they go over and over, and the better you do, the more you do it, the better you get at it. So an individual who sees a therapist for 20 years about the issue around their mother, it's like, how are they being of service to the world? So then you can give a 1,000,000-page documentation of why somebody's so messed up, and they can walk out of the room with this documentation of why they're messed up. What this particular work does, and again, it's not for everyone, and I suppose it could be framed as a non-traditional therapy in that it deals not only with our story, it deals with what I love to think of our body as being our unconscious. So it gets down to our cellular level. It gets down to the deep, dark places of ourselves and getting to what a root is. My belief is that when we truly work from the inside out, when we can get down to the very root of how it is that our life is turned out or how it is that the circumstances have turned out as they are in our life. When we can get down to the root, slowly, the joy, slowly, the feeling of feeling filled up begins to radiate from the inside out so that we become centered self rather than self-centered. Instead of looking outside oneself for solutions, like so many folks in the United States, they look out to drugs or alcohol or other people, or as you termed at one time, the self-destructive section of the bookstore, the self-help books, that sometimes we look outside ourselves rather than looking deep inside, which again takes a lot of courage. And what we may see in there may be scary and it may be uncomfortable. And it reminds me that our mind is like a cap, with all the distractions we have, and our bodies with all the emotions and the feelings and actually the barometer of who we see ourselves as being. When we're still, such as in meditation, which is a very courageous thing to do, when we're still, oftentimes the cap comes up and then all these feelings come up. If an individual decides to work with me, sometimes there will be the discomfort of things coming up. And one of the wonderful things is to stay with those feelings and know that, you've gotten over the worst, which is living through it. And it's oftentimes the memory, the re-emptying or the re-inviting or the like post-traumatic stress disorder. It's that we keep getting charged up and we keep getting aroused by situations that happen from all our senses. If we can come to terms with memories, with feelings, with sensations, and be with them and stay with them as one is doing a type of therapy, then it cleans it out so that there's more room. And to be able to have grace and to be able to have empathy towards ourselves, for, as you said earlier, we've all done the best we could at any time. I've done classes in, your perfect past, embracing your perfect past, that everything we've done without a label has been the best we could do at that time. Everything we've done has had a positive intention, although the outcome isn't always positive.
Well, that's true. It's like, when you hear be careful what you wish for, you may surely get it. And you'll say, well, I didn't wish for that. Well, yeah, you did. You just weren't clear about it.
Right.
Now,
And, when we grow up in a certain family system, we have our reality within and our perceptions. And so we step out into life when we leave the family with sometimes those same lenses. So then we keep attracting in the same scenarios that we were comfortable with or that were familiar within our own family system.
Interesting stuff. Now, here's something, too, when you think about the holidays, this can be a real challenging time. Let's say, you've heard the story, Dad went out to go and get, cranberry sauce. We never seen him again. So you've got a parent who's literally walked out.
Right. Which can be devastating,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't believe that a parent just walks out. Usually there's indicators. And part of it is being sensitive to the system. And yes, it is devastating. I've again have had clients where parents have walked out when they've been babies, when they've been 2 months old, when they've been 15 months old. And coming from a child's perspective, sometimes a child will turn their back on the parent for doing that. And if you look at them in how they're living their life, sometimes there's a term of not being able to stand up in life because someone significant within their life left, and then all of a sudden, and it's powerful because all of a sudden children often take it as their responsibility when somebody leaves like that. What did I do to create that? What can I do to make it better? When in reality, it's not the child's place to take that, although in their magical thinking sometimes they do. So it's in doing this constellation work, there's a way to bring harmony, and there's a way, again, the word resolution, around the issue where a parent did walk out. It's not always our place to say what they did was good or bad. It neither was good or bad, it just was. So how do we come to terms with a reality that may mess up our lives and our decisions and our relationships? And by doing some constellation work, again, that works with the senses and on a very deep soul level, not the ego level, rather the soul level, then we're able to have some healing around it.
I know one of the things, especially when it comes, you have certain birthdays that'll come up around, December and so forth, and there was a story that I remember about a young girl who no longer wanted to celebrate her birthday, didn't even want to be recognized for it because it had something to do with another family member being affected around that time and almost dying. And it's, it's like, how do you help someone like that understand, no, you need to be honored and celebrated instead of abandoning, this moment in your life just because this happened to, one of your siblings. And so it gets to be real tough about what you think you should do or what's possible.
And children, again, this is going to the level of the soul, and this is speaking soul language, and within the collective. People within families, especially children in this particular approach, often take on the sacrifice. They take on the burden that a parent carries. If there's abuse, if there's depression, oftentimes a child, again, in their magical thinking and their way of thinking to make it better me, mom, better me, dad, than you. And so if there's a parent who's suicidal, the child sometimes becomes suicidal and may actually carry through. A child that is within a realm where there's some abuse going on, rather than the parent taking the abuse, the child does it. And this can be difficult to wrap our minds around.
Well, that's interesting because when you take a look at when a teen takes their life, or as we consider things like the shooting in schools that we seem to see more and more of it with each passing year, it's like they're pointing the finger at the individual who is holding the gun to say, where did it go wrong with them? It sounds to me like you're suggesting that it might have not been them, but it was something else. Just as a possibility, like you said, it's hard to wrap your mind around this sort of thought, but that's an interesting trajectory to take this to.
And if there's what I've used the word before, it's called entanglement, and that's a burden. If somebody has a chronic illness, a chronic pain, addiction, or a suicidal ideation, depression, mental illness of some sort, when we can look fully at the system. Hellinger mentioned when he was trained as a psychotherapist in Germany, 70% of what the folks who he saw presented themselves with as issues or problems stem directly from family systems. And we can say, when I go to therapy, we talk about the family. This is looking at it different in that there's the trickle-down effect where if there isn't resolution, then a child will take it on the burden to create homeostasis or to what we term recalibrate or bring balance back into the system. Often misbehavior within a family system will bring balance, if that makes sense. And in order for if someone is raised, and I hope I'm answering this with the question that you were asking, when someone separates themselves, for instance, if there's abuse in the family, if there's depression, if there's alcoholism with it, if a child or a person removes themselves from the system and said, I'm breaking the cycle, I'm going to get better, sometimes their misbehavior, according to the collective conscience, creates good behavior on their part. So people within a collective can have the conscience to be able to do something. If we go back again to thinking about Nazi Germany with that whole regime, it was within the collective conscience of them that they were able to do the atrocities that were done. When someone steps away from that and says, I am doing it no more, according to the conscience, they are misbehaving with an unconscious, that they're actually pulling away, yet what they're getting is a conscience that they can live with.
Interesting stuff, that's for sure. And it doesn't have to always be about the holidays. Yes, you actually did. It's just also dynamic to think about, now as you have helped people, what kind of stories do you get, like outcomes when it comes to holidays and even beyond that, where people just finally, after work, they may not have even been directly involved in it. There's somebody, it could be an aunt and uncle in another state that comes in and says, just all of a sudden things just seem and feel different. Share with us, those kind of stories so people get a clear idea about what possibly does happen.
Well, the beauty of this work is if we use the collective conscience as being like a spider web that has all the intricate little parts to it. When an individual comes in and wants to do a piece of work, wants to do some clearing, wants to do some resolution, there are specific questions that need to be asked to make sure that they're not stepping out of their place to do it. For instance, if someone comes and wants to change their older sibling and have them live a better life, it is not the younger child's sibling's place to do that. If a person comes in and wants to create a better alignment or a better relationship with a family member, the beauty of this work is by the individual doing the piece of work, not only do they create healing and a sense of well-being for themselves, it radiates out into the whole system. And I've worked with people who have said, short of a miracle, my whole life has changed. I was dealing with a daughter that was addicted, another one who was suicidal. After my husband died, I had no place. I didn't know where I belonged. And after we did a piece of work that seemed very subtle, yet it had the profound effects of the resolution, their whole life transformed. And, I know the difficulty of stepping into a dynamic after we've done our work and stepping into what we refer to as the invisible dynamics or the invisible field that we step into. People will continue behaving as they're behaving. Somehow when we do our deep core work and somehow when we energetically shift how we greet people and how we are, that creates an amazing shift within the whole system. You know, people have said, wow, I haven't talked to my brother for years, and out of the blue, my brother called and said, do you want to have lunch next week? Or family members that have been disbanded through disconnection and through revenge and all that sort of thing may call another sibling and say, I'd love to come down with you. I'd love to come and meet you and have lunch. And by the way, I'm bringing my son with you. And all of a sudden there's starting to be more of, instead of the severance of the family, there's the coming together of the family. And the term is referred to as phenomenological in the quantum field, phenomenological in the knowing field, in that it goes to our senses. It's similar to going into a smoky room and tasting it and smelling it and feeling it, yet when you step away from it, it's difficult to describe. This type of work is done on a level of our senses rather than from a cognitive or, you know, our right brain or our left brain. It's coming from our place of our right brain, where we're actually seeing and knowing and feeling a truth or a secret that's revealed. And somehow that type of healing, and to me it's sacred. To me, I don't understand. I'm not even going to begin to try to explain it, other than getting the testimonials and physically and physiologically and other ways, seeing how people who have done work in this particular approach, their lives and their whole physical being has shifted.
Now, I believe, as I said, I'm pretty new to this system, TalkShoe Live. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis, and our guest today, Catherine Van Wetter of Courage Consultants, talking about how we can kind of reshape our holidays so they're not such a bad affair depending on who you are and what your family's all about. We have, I believe, a caller from Washington. Washington, are you on the air there? Well, okay. Well, anyway, we see they're participating, but it doesn't seem like they're actually on the line. So it's interesting that you say that one individual, let's just say it could be me, who comes in and, you know, I don't know, for some strange reason around the holidays, I just don't feel like being around anybody, much less my family for that matter. Like the deeper sense that you might want to have control over your situation. It's expected that you show up for the family, but you just don't want to live that way. But then you finally decide, well, you know, what is really going on with me, because I don't feel good with that kind of thinking, where I can maybe take a look at this and change it. And so I take that step, and then you're saying this creates a ripple effect within the whole conscious system, where other people kind of, for lack of a better word, kind of unload their baggage, so to speak.
And, you know, sometimes the people around us, when we start making big shifts, when somebody decides that they wake up morning after morning and they're not happy and they're disgruntled and things aren't going well, and they finally decide to take a deep look inside and do some true healing within, that sometimes those around us, they notice, and often when there's even just the subtlest of change, a slight change, it creates repercussions in the system. And so, you know, people could challenge us, you know, well, you seem awfully calm and you seem not to be concerned when I say these things to you. What's that about? And it's almost as if there's been a riff in the structure, and so we want to see if we can get somebody revved up so that they go back to their old behavior. When this work is done on such a deep level, when there's a sense of peace, when there's a sense of resolution, when there's, again, the grace and the humility and the compassion around oneself, somehow that shows up to everyone that we meet. And the subtleness of change in the field, perhaps it's that we come into our family affair in a more relaxed demeanor, and like a duck with the water off their back, perhaps it's being able to just be present with what is rather than needing to control, and rather how difficult it is to step into a situation without a preconceived notion. How wonderful it would be to step into a situation that in the past may have been antagonistic, when one could step in with compassion, with non-defendedness, in order for the space to open up for others to appear, and to be at the point of proactive rather than reactive. Because when we can see a situation in front of us, be a family dynamic or a physical ailment that we have or some sort of challenge, when we can settle into what is, it is what it is, I don't like it, it doesn't feel good, when we can settle into that truly in our heart and eventually our mind following, then we have the resolution. When I can step into the reality that my family may not have been the best place that I grew up in or the safest place, I am now at choice to be able to recreate or manifest a new reality. Somehow coming from that place, it seems to lighten things up. And yes, it's a process. And yes, we refer to it as an unveiling and an unfolding. When someone does a piece of work, because we're not speaking in linear time, such as it's 12:30 and it's going to take you 1 month to get to the place you want to go, rather this is a beautiful unfolding of who we are. So it's those wonderful surprises of how our relationship shifts. Wow, they actually called me even though I haven't talked to them for 20 years, or wow, we actually had a conversation without wanting to strike out at each other. Somehow there's a shift there that's so subtle that we could wake up and think, wow, I just noticed my relationship was different. So it's a beautiful, it comes from the place of curiosity and trusting that the unfolding is happening rather than pushing it and expecting it to be on a certain timeline. So it's the wonderful expectation or the wonderful unfolding with the curiosity.
Exactly. Well, Catherine Van Wetter, thank you for joining us on the Beyond 50 radio program today. Weren't so sure if Washington was there on the line to maybe make a question or comment as we are running out of time. But you are listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and our guest today, Catherine Van Wetter. Thank you for joining us today. And you can find out more about her and systemic constellation work by just simply logging on to Catherine at courageconsultants.net. And if you'd like to continue this chat with her, you can always go to our blog. Just simply go to the www.beyond50radio, that's 50 with a 50.blogspot.com, and you'll know you're on the right page because you'll see a large frog just waiting to gobble up your information. I'm Daniel Davis, and be sure to join us again next week right here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Stay tuned again as we'll be right back at you. And remember, live your day past halfway, and thank you, Catherine.